Well, welcome to the premiere show of The Artifact Whisperer. I'm Daniel, that's moi, by the way. I'm Daniel Weinberg, and we're here at the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago. And this is a dream that we've had for a while, ever since we began our sister broadcast virtual book signing. And we wanted to also bring to you artifacts that we have here in our shop. The show is about American historical artifacts and the collecting, research, and usage of them, books, autographs, photographs, and all other historical artifacts related to American history. It's an intellectually satisfying pursuit, I think, because artifacts are really intended to arouse curiosity, and we're looking, of course, for the stories behind them. Just as an aside, we find it interesting that the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop, where we're broadcasting from, has been rated the #1 peaceful place in the nation as a quiet retreat for urban business travelers. #1. Now, we find it ironic that here we are sitting in the midst of war and we're the most peaceful place in the country, but we may be restful, but we're never boring. So we hope that you will come in at any time while we're open and see the artifacts that we have and enjoy the knowledge of our staff, by the way. And I think you're going to have fun, and with our show as a draw. We're going to have a number of show segments, which you'll see throughout this 35 minutes, I suppose. The purpose really is to inform and to educate and to entertain, to provide insights into the collecting experience, and to allow you collectors of American historical artifacts to interact with a dealer in the same field. From time to time, I'm going to editorialize on current events or artifacts in the news, as we'll call it. For instance, I'll show you one very quickly. Here's one that happened to have been in our vault just when the body of Richard III was discovered in a parking lot in England. And this particular one is John Wilkes Booth on April 29th of 1864, the performance of Richard III. He was playing the Duke of Gloucester. So this artifact kind of came up right at the right moment for us to be able to show off a piece that is in the news. Now, we're going to speak of other things, such as maybe the Lincoln hat in another show. But one that we want to show at this time and talk about is really the anomalies that we found as collectors and dealers and artifact hunters in the movie Lincoln by Steven Spielberg. A wonderful movie. It was terrific on history, and I think we all enjoyed that. But it was fun to just sit there and watch some of the artifacts go by, which didn't always seem to be correct. I made a little list of a few of the anomalies that I found. Let's start out with some of the autograph anomalies. It was interesting that near the beginning of the film, someone had a letter in his hand, and I heard the rustle of that letter, and I almost jumped out of my seat and said, wait a minute, that's pulp paper, that ain't rag. So there's a difference, even the look of it for that matter. I found that when Lincoln was if you remember in the scene where he was on John Hay's bed in the middle of the night, and he had a letter in his hand about a pardon. And he kept going back and forth like this. Of course, that was wrong. It was as if there was a staple here. And if you know that an autograph of the day, paper of the day, would have opened up just like a book. And that's how he would have been looking at those papers. The other thing that was kind of interesting, that he signed his endorsement totally at the wrong spot. What a great teaching moment that would have been. So what would have happened, he would have read the letter just like this, then he would have turned it on the back and onto its side, and then written right in the middle his endorsement. Carefully, by the way, not quickly as he did in the movie. Because then they would have taken this letter and folded it like this, and this is how you would have filed it. Just like that. So his endorsement and some of the clerk's writings might have been right on there, so you could quickly flip through all the pieces that you needed to get. So the endorsements was not there, although he used a pencil, which was interesting, because it does maybe explain why at times he used a pencil for endorsements, although that's fairly scarce, instead of ink. The Executive Mansion letterhead was interesting in another scene where one of the actors had a letter right in front of him, and you could see with light, you looking from the back, and you could see the letterhead said Executive Mansion, but in a moon shape. And the letterhead that Lincoln used at the Executive Mansion all went straight, horizontal, and never in that moon shape. There was another one that I kind of liked where he was dictating a telegram, and at the end he said, "A. Lincoln and a date." And that's what we say here all the time when we talk about certainly endorsements, where he'd write out what he was saying, let this man take the oath of December 8th, 1863 and be discharged or whatever, A. Lincoln and a date. One thing also that disturbed me was the Grant letter that you saw a couple of times. Personally, I thought that Grant's signature could have been done much better by my dog, even. Now, another one that was interesting that really kind of came up to me and was noticeable immediately as something that was not from the day was this wonderful piece that was made really in 1907. Admiral George Dewey went around to Japan, opened it up with the Great White Fleet in 1907. So these were the types of souvenirs that a sailor would come back with either from Japan or Korea. And this is almost exactly what you saw in Lincoln's office. So it looked patriotic, it looked nice, it looked almost 19th century, but it wasn't. So there's one you can tell people about when you see the next time you see that movie. My wife got one for me, DVD, for my birthday, so that was, I do have it now. Well, that's some of the things we'll talk about in the news of artifacts, and if you have one that you might know that we may miss, if you want to email it in at info@artifactwhisperer.com, please do that, and maybe we'll use that on a subsequent show. Now, I'm going to go into a little bit of a soliloquy here, since this is our premiere, and just talk a bit about what artifacts are, and the same with collectors. What's the makeup of the collector? So let's start out with a artifact definition. And the Oxford English Dictionary says that the word artifact is formed from the Latin arti factus, or to make art. A thing made by art, or an artificial product. So we believe here that each artifact offers a flashlight glimpse into the human condition. And because each was produced for some human need or desire, it's the stories that we try to seek, both ourselves as dealers and you as a collector, that we try to find what that story is and piece it together. Sometimes the story changes after we sell it, and you as a collector do a little bit more research that we can't do all the time, and you found something out about that person or the artifact that changes the story. And artifacts do reveal the era from which they derive in a very real sense. The collection is, in its entirety, presents a theme of life or an era, revealing a more complete story. And that's what we're going to try to do with this show. And you patch enough of these relics together, and as Lincoln stated upon first viewing his first life mask, there's the animal himself. Now, collectors, there's no known antidote for the collecting habit. Science has worked on it for years, and there's no 12-step plan. I'm Daniel Weinberg, and I'm here today to come out and testify that I'm a collector. Well, I think it's a lifelong habit and no antidote. So I learned how collecting is and what collectors are very early on in my tenure here at the bookshop, almost 42 years ago, where a man kept coming into the shop, kept coming in. It was about 3 times before he disappeared on me. But he was a middle-aged black man who came in and was very interested in Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And the second time he came in, I realized he couldn't read. But he wanted to immerse himself in his hero, someone he admired, and in an era that was important to him. Maybe he had been a soldier in World War II, and FDR was his commander-in-chief. Whatever it was, he had books surrounding him that reminded him of FDR, but he couldn't access them. There's a real collector. Now, a collection is a number of objects gathered together and viewed as a whole and arranged. I have just a few observations I've had on collectors themselves. And if you have some that you might want to have me add, please email me. So what impels the collector is usually the desire to be able to personally touch an admired person or an appreciated era. And I find that one becomes, he or she is aware of being a collector when you discover you're mourning something more than the things that you have. You remember something you've lost and you didn't get and you should have gotten, and that drills a hole in you, then you know you're a collector. The family knows where the collector is. He's in the next room with his collection, organizing and connecting with it and planning additions, so that's always nice. The family knows where the collector is, not out stealing hubcaps perhaps, which could be very lucrative actually. Many of the world's museums and libraries owe their exhibits to the endeavors of the collector. Another aspect of collecting besides acquisition is curatorial. Collectors have always acted as curators of their holdings for the next generation, and therefore they're the true extensions, I believe, of the museum, which is why they're very simpatico. And being embedded in society as much as we all are, we're in our own little neighborhoods, the collector is able to display and share his or her treasures directly to the community, and keeping historical study alive on a very individual basis. Could be the first time that kids, let alone adults, can actually perhaps touch a true artifact that will bring them back to that era and which you would explain to them. And of course, that's because collectors enjoy sharing their collections, loaning them for exhibits. And many adult owes his or her interest in artifact history to such an occurrence. Now, Lincolniana happens to offer one of the world's richest areas of collecting, and I'm just going to quickly say why, because there's so many intersects that occur through the Lincoln story. So their political campaign memorabilia, mourning culture, the history of photography, the law, the use of language, cultural memory, commerce, war, and human interaction and the like. And each of these segments and areas have their own collections that you can be associated with, artifacts that are associated with those areas. So there are autographs and books, manuscripts and letters, jewelry, weaponry, oil paintings, prints and lithographs, broadsides, ephemera of all types, photographs, medals and coins, and even just stuff, especially in the Lincoln and Civil War world. Because all of this is exponentially up for the Civil War artifacts. Now, as a dealer, and I'm a storyteller, and I help to have artifacts come alive. I call myself the Artifact Whisperer, and this is your hobby, and at the shop we'll try to make it enjoyable. Now let's come to the next feature of our show, which is Lincoln from Life. Now, this is a little bit different in the art world versus here in the historical world. Harold Holzer, I think, said it best. Quote, "Well, I've always thought from life means real sittings or from life experiences, meaning sketches or observations on the spot, later framed from memory into portraits, but invariably with the help of photographs, especially for Lincoln." So I'm going to show you a few pieces right now that are Lincoln from life, and it's an interesting little area to have a number of things like this. I'm going to start out with an oil painting we have over here that we just got recently. And this is by a man named Charles Merck, who worked for Alexander Hessler here in Chicago at Hessler's Chicago Gallery. And you're going to find that this looks very familiar because it is. It's partially based upon the photograph that Hessler took down in Springfield when Lincoln was presidential nominee. And this is in the beginning of June, June 3rd or 4th, I think it was, that he went down to Springfield to take a series of pictures of Hessler. Of course, he had to have had people with him, and who better than Charles Merck, who was his portrait artist resident. And he was in Hessler's studio, and he produced oil portraits from life which is in an advertisement that Hessler had in a Chicago directory, and also from daguerreotypes. So Merck must have helped him with the glass plates and the other paraphernalia that had to be taken down by train for a major person. This is someone who may become president of the United States. So they went down, and Merck certainly saw him because the eyes are positively Lincoln. I've had another oil from life by a portrait artist named Wolfe, who lived in Springfield and saw Lincoln fairly commonly for a couple of years and knew his eyes well. These match up completely with what Wolfe had seen. So Merck came back and used, of course, the photograph that Hessler had taken to produce this, but he had his own ideations, his own feelings, his own immediacy, framed from his memory and from the real-life experience of observing Lincoln on the spot. This was displayed at the Chicago Meat Pit. First it went into Hessler's studio for a year or so, and I think probably as an advertisement. Here's what I can do for you, and he had hoped the President of the United States to show his clientele. But during the Sanitary Fair of 1863, it was the first one here in Chicago, and a meat packer, Colonel R.M. Hoff, helped with the Sanitary Fair, and he purchased this, had been purchased and redonated 2 times until he finally bought it for $62.50. Shortly after his death, he gave it to a Lincoln, Illinois resident, Nathaniel Pegram, and then it was given to Paul Cowsley, who had been publisher of the Alton Telegraph newspaper here in Illinois. In fact, it's shown in a 1958 Alton Telegraph newspaper hanging on their wall. And then by descent down through his family. So here is a piece that has wonderful provenance, reaching back right to the moment that it was painted, for that matter. Another piece that we have from life is by a man named Pierre Morand. And here is Lincoln in death. It's the last, really what he calls the final drawing. He says it on the back. He signs the final drawing and signs his name. And on the side, in the margin, he writes City Hall, New York, 25 April 1865. He had first been there, he probably bribed a guard, or he somehow got in, because he had followed Lincoln's body from Washington, where he had actually made a number of sketches from life of Lincoln, mainly in the streets, and where he found him. And most of these are in the Missouri Historical Society Museum in St. Louis. But he made a quick sketch, and he could do it quickly because he knew Lincoln's face inside out. And then he went back to his studio with that sketch and produced this final drawing, as he says. It's a white wash on a heavy paper, and as I said, is signed by him. So there is the last image of Lincoln from the flesh. But what we say, from life. Another piece that we have that I'm going to say is from life, although there's a generation in between, but I think it's close enough to have that feel because you can't really get this from life. Here is a life mask of Lincoln that had been taken by Leonard Volk. And later on, it was done. The cast was done, of course, here in Chicago in 1860 by him. And Lincoln tells the story of how it was done. But the first mask that came out went to his son, Douglas Volk, and then Douglas gave it to a friend of his who had it in his studio when a man named Richard Gilder, publisher in New York, the Century magazine, he came in and saw that original and thought it should be for the public, for all of us, and he wanted to buy it for the National Museum, now the Smithsonian. Well, each subscriber who gave money, there were 33 of them, including Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula, they put money in to buy the mask, and successfully, but each of them got then a full mask taken directly from that original. And this is one of those, taken directly from the original. And it's on the back of it, it even says, and maybe I can turn it around and show you what the back looks like. And this is unusual because it does tell the story of how the subscription is being produced. But it has something I've never seen before, and that is the opening where the name would go, the subscriber's name would go. First time I've seen one that didn't have that, so presumably, this is the last one they made, and they didn't have any more subscribers. It was just kept and passed down, and now it's here in our shop. So certainly a life mask, almost by definition, is from life, although this has one step in between. I guess we could say from life, though. Could be his blood. No. We just obtained, interestingly enough, a little swatch of the towel that had been staunching Lincoln's blood at the Peterson house the night of April 14th and the morning of April 15th of 65. And here's a little piece of it, fairly raw. We have to do some conservation to get it off the backing. But here you can see Lincoln's blood in 2 or 3 places. And that's certainly a life piece that one can get and have in one's collection. They don't come up very often. Another item from life that we could say is from life is a photograph. Now here is Whipple's photograph, one of the last ever produced of Lincoln at the White House. And he wasn't very happy, as you can see. The sun was in his eye, air was in, wind was in his hair. He was really unhappy. And he also, because Whipple had used Tad to get to him and take a couple of photographs. So photography certainly is, at those days, from life. And you have to be careful when you're collecting that you're not collecting a pirated version of albumin. This is an albumin photograph that was used during Lincoln's day. So photography is another one that is a good life collection. Another one that you might want to look for, I don't have an example of it here, is autographs. And there are numbers of times that I see an autograph of Abraham Lincoln in which he has smudged it. Now, you don't see it in letters or documents very often at all. It's really more for endorsements when he's seeing a letter and he has to write an endorsement and he's signing his life away and every morning, big hands, ink all over them, and you can sometimes see the whorl of his fingertips on there or a smudge that he produced. And I like seeing that because it shows Lincoln from life, doing his job on a day-to-day basis. Well, I think that is kind of a fun thing to do. Now, I think it's time to look at our next segment, which is called Collector's Corners. The Collector's Corner. And we're going to have you, the collector, have a chance at showing off something that of themselves and who you are and why you collect and what you collect. So we have a tape of David Leroy, who came through the shop. He's a Boise, Idaho attorney with a strong background in civil and government law. He's served as Idaho Lieutenant Governor, a candidate for Governor of Idaho in Congress. He served on the Idaho Board of Land Commissioners. He's an oil and gas commissioner. He has over 50 articles on various legal topics, including criminal justice, family law, litigation procedure, government policy, and history. He's also the author, and I don't have one here, of Mr. Lincoln's book, and I should show that to you, Dave's other service to the Lincoln community, which is really on the story of how the Lincoln-Douglas debates were published. We have copies of that here since we published it, to help publish it for him. And if you want to see a link to Mr. Lincoln's book, you'll see it on the artifactwhisperer.com, I think, homepage, maybe below the screen where you're viewing us today. I think you'll enjoy this book. He's also had been chairman of the Idaho Abraham Lincoln Bicentennial Commission and a chairman of the Governor's Council of the United States Abraham Lincoln Bicentennial Commission, and frankly, a collector of real note. So let's see David Leroy talk to us about being a collector.